We also see an increased risk of diabetes for babies that aren't breastfed. And like I said, 30%, 33%, 1/3 of Native people have diabetes. It's the leading cause of death among Native people. And depending on how long a mother breastfeeds, we can see a reduction of 40 to 90% in the risk of diabetes, right? That's huge, and that's where a lot of our breastfeeding dollars does come from diabetes programs. Like the diabetes program is, seeing that this is really important for reduction in diabetes as well. We also have heart disease. This is also one of the leading causes of death of Native people. We see an increased risk of heart disease and several cancers when a baby is breastfed. And then of course the optimal bonding and attachment, right? This stuff I love, like when we get into attachment and bonding and how all that works. Babies that aren't breastfed are held 50% less than babies that are breastfed over the course of their life, right? 50% less over the course of their life, right? I even think about like how, and I see this all the time on Facebook, right, where people, post a picture of like their 4-month-old baby feeding themselves in their car seat, in their car seat, and they're very proud, right? Look, my baby is so strong and can feed themselves, and I'm just like that so even if we bottle feed, we have to talk about the importance of doing that in arms for a long time, right? There's no reason a baby should be feeding themselves ever, right? A baby, right? Obviously children develop, and babies developmentally appropriate, like as they start solids, things like that, we want them feeding themselves. But when they're getting bottles, when they're being breastfed, that should be in the arms of someone that loves them and cares for them, right? But yeah, that's pretty significant, right? That 50% more time in the arms of their mamas, right? Or being held by other people. And many of our communities too, this I think is interesting, being held, especially from our elders, right? Like seeing a baby being held all the time, we might be told like we're spoiling our baby, right? Or that's seen as a negative, right? Or that like our baby can only be comforted in the arms of someone, and they'll be like, see, you're spoiling that baby, right? You're doing all this stuff, okay? Which is like, yes, that's happening. Yes, baby should be comforted by someone, but they're certainly not being spoiled. But when we go back and think about like, why is that seen as a negative, right? Why would it be a negative for a baby to not be independent like that, okay? And that's where we kind of have to go back to like our historical trauma and our history, right? And when we come from a history where our children are unexpectedly, unknowingly end up by themselves, right? End up in a boarding school, end up in a foster home, end up, who knows where, they need to be able to take care of themselves, right? They need to be able to comfort themselves. They need to be able to do those things. That's what's in the back of that grandma's head when she says your baby's spoiled, right? Even though that might not be the reality, right? Your baby is not at risk for being taken to boarding school. Your baby might not at all be at risk of being taken into foster care or something like that. But genetically, we don't know that, right? Like deep down, like in our unconscious, that's not the way our brain is thinking. We're just thinking about every single generation before us, what happened to their babies, right? So we also have to have some understanding of where our folks are coming from. We see the same thing in the African American community, right? Of not wanting to spoil babies. I've had women tell me they don't want to breastfeed because they don't want a spoiled baby, right? They don't want a baby that needs to be held all the time. They don't want those things, right? Because in her genetic memory, yes, of course she doesn't want that, right? Her baby's like, it wasn't that long ago that her child was sold to a different slave owner, right? And needed to be taken care of by someone else, okay? So kind of like I often say, like, listen to those words behind the words, right? Like we might be saying we don't want our baby spoiled, or, your baby, needs too much attention, your baby's not independent, Why are those things valued now, right? Because traditionally they weren't, right? Traditionally, our babies were on us at all times, right? We breastfed for a very long time. They were by our side until they were old enough to go out, right? And when we think about attachment and healthy attachment, breastfeeding absolutely models that, right? We think, I was in Bemidji last weekend, and it was just like, there was a 1-year-old baby, and it was like the most beautiful illustration of a healthy attachment, because we were sitting at rounds like this, and I was at one table, and he was at the table next to me, and he saw me, and so I, smiled, and I really wanted him to come and talk to me, and, because he was so cute, and he was like just starting to walk, so he was toddling around, and it took him almost an hour to eventually come to me, but he'd go like this and smile, and then go back, check in with mom, right? And then he'd go this a little bit longer, take a few more steps, and then go back and check with mom, right? It was just you just saw this beautiful, beautiful, healthy attachment, right? Of mom is absolutely you go explore, go meet that nice lady, right? She wasn't worried about him going and talking to strangers or something like that, right? She's you do that. And so he knows that he has that safe, that safe place to kind of go explore the world, because she's always been there for him. And then he would just, kind of come back and check in with her, right? And be her safe haven, where she could give him a little loving, give him some kiss. He may nurse for a minute, that kind of stuff. And it did. I mean, it took almost an hour to where he finally came to me and touched me and, let me tickle him and, that kind of stuff. But it was just, that's the things that babies learn, right? And how they learn attachment and where things are safe, right? And in the end, it is our breastfed babies that are the most secure and are the most attached, right? Because they've been told that and taught that by their mothers, right? Because she's always been there, right? She's always been there. And at the same time, she is absolutely, hopefully open to them going and exploring the world too, right? And feeling safe and secure, because she's the constant, right? She's the constant. And then for babies too, the way I think it's really cool, the way babies bond with other people other than their breastfeeding mother, right? And they do that through her though, right? Babies don't bond with their dads because they share half of their genetic material, right? It's not, a baby isn't born knowing their dad the way they know their mom, right? Babies, when they're born, they know their mom. They know her smell, they know that instantly, right? And we see really cool research where babies are, they're born and then they go skin to skin with their mom, and then, an hour later they're put skin to skin with someone else and someone else and someone else, and their brain reacts differently to when they're put back with their mom. So they know their mothers, right? That's that instant thing that babies know. But for dads, for grandmas, for aunties, siblings, they don't know them like that. We don't share that. How they bond with those people is through their mother, right? So a baby doesn't bond by being bottle fed by their dad. They bond by being breastfed by their mom and seeing their dad right here, right? They see that their mom loves their dad, right? They see that their mom trusts their grandma, right? Because every time they go to breastfeed, every time they go to spend time together, they're bringing them a sandwich, or they're bringing them a cup of water, or they're just looking over the shoulder at how cute their baby is, right? And then as the baby sees that more and more and more, they're like, hey, you're cool, right? I love you too, because my mom loves you. Okay, so that kind of stuff is really cool. That's where I like to give that information to, because there is definitely jealousy that happens when moms breastfeed and other people want that bond, right? They do want it because it is pretty special and pretty awesome to see. And so they think it's related to food, right? Because all we do with breast milk, we just focus on it as a food, right? And a way to grow a baby, and we equate it to formula, which is not true, right? It's not the way we need to do it. We get so much more. I always say all this stuff is just bonus to the, with breast milk, it's really amazing. Just the bonding part is huge in itself. But, a lot of times we'll have dads or other partners, or grandparents, or they'll say like, well, I want to bond with the baby too, so I want to and want to feed the bottle, right, or feed the baby a bottle. And that's where it's really neat to give them information about how they bond, how they actually bond with their babies, because they don't need to feed, right? Because again, when we're breastfeeding our baby, they're getting so much more than food, right? And that's why babies go to the breast so many times throughout the day, and why we might see breastfed babies totally overfed by other caregivers when mom's away or work or something like that, because that baby gets upset, they go to the breast. That baby's excited, they go to the breast. That baby's hungry, they go to that breast. They get hurt, they go to the breast, right? They're constantly going to the breast, right? Checking in with mom, getting comforted. That's their safe place. And so then when like grandma's watching the baby, right? And baby falls down and gets hurt and is crying, grandma's like, oh, baby's hungry, right? I'm gonna go ahead and feed the baby, which is not necessarily the case. So it is important to give those folks other tools to calm a baby as well. Yeah, but that was, making that video for me was really fun. I was kind of newer into doing some breastfeeding work. I've been doing this since about 2010. And, thinking back like to that Sesame Street video of, Buffy nursing with Big Bird, and I think about how amazing that would be if that happened today on Sesame Street. It'd just be incredible. But times have changed, because Mr. Rogers did a great breastfeeding unit once too, back in the 80s. But for me as a little girl, watching Sesame Street and watching Buffy, Buffy on Sesame Street, she was like everything to me. Like I watched her, and her son Dakota was always on the show. For me, watching Buffy on there, like not only was Buffy, like she's a beautiful Native woman and awesome, but for me, watching her at home, I was just like, she was so like such an amazing mom to me. She was constantly hugging Dakota, kissing on him, singing with him, dancing with him. For several years, she was a cast member, and that was, a model of mothering that I really loved seeing, and was really empowering to me as a young Native girl, seeing that, right? And seeing Buffy breastfeed, I didn't, at the time, I didn't think anything of it as a 5-year-old. But then later on, once I started thinking about my breastfeeding journey and how I've gotten to do what I do now, I realized that clip of Buffy breastfeeding Dakota was the one and only time I had ever seen anybody breastfeed in my life. Like not just Native women. Like I had never seen white women breastfeed. I never seen it on TV. I never saw that happen. So that was like the only image that I had ever had. And again, didn't really make the connection that she was necessarily breastfeeding, or that was significant. But the way she was attached and bonded to her son, that stood out to me, right? Like even as a young girl, was something that was really, really powerful. Yeah. It is super hard. Like it's super hard. And I will say, I mean, like me as a therapist, like I've typically in the past gotten to work for a really long time with families. So it's a little different, like I'm able to spend months working with a family before we go a little deeper into that. Some things that I really like when, as far as like things to ask moms, is like one of my favorite lines is tell me more, right? So like if a mom says she doesn't want to breastfeed, we don't say why, we don't say, anything like that. We say, tell me more about that, right? And then like, who knows, she might throw out something like, well, no one in my mom couldn't breastfeed, so, and she says I won't be able to, that none of the women in my family could breastfeed, right? And it's like, oh, well, tell me more about that, right? And then we learn that like, oh, the babies were taken at the hospital, like there, who knows, right? Can happen, and we can maybe like give some information and educate based on that kind of stuff. But I will say, like when talking about the trauma and the trauma history, it does have to be done in a really respectful way. It has to be done at the right time, and it has to be done from the right person, right? Like that kind of stuff. I had one mom home visiting. I was doing a training for home visitors, and one of the home visitors was just like, really, she was kind of like me when I first learned about historical trauma. Like, to me, like the whole world made sense when I learned about this. I was like 25, right? And I'm like, oh my gosh, my whole life makes sense. This is amazing. I need to tell everybody about it, right? Like, I want to tell everybody about it. And that's how this home visitor was feeling. And what was happening is she was telling everyone about it because she wanted to tell them, not because they needed to hear it, right? She wanted to tell them, and ended up really re-traumatizing a lot of people, right? And she was just like, but if we just taught, like if they just knew, like it would be so much better. It's like, yes, but we also have to recognize that families are where they're at, right? And so we have to finesse this, you know, and something like talking about historical trauma, like that might not come well from a white nurse, right? Like that might not be the thing that you're gonna bring up with a family, but like you as a Native peer, right? You might be able to bring it up, right? And it's not to say, I mean, some of the most amazing like historical trauma advocates and folks that I've met are non-natives, right? So it's not something that like, only Native people can talk to Native people about it. That's not the case at all. But we do have to be very, very trusted before we have that conversation. So yeah, so I like the tell me more. I like starting small, right? I mean, things like all moms, like if you're like a peer, you know, like a peer counselor or peer supporter, or just like a mom in the community that people know, like, hey, she's a super good mom, she's the breastfeeder, like I'm gonna go talk to her, you know, that kind of stuff. Like, you know, that's something that we can maybe say something, like, because we all end up talking about our moms, right? And our grandmas, like when we're moms, that's just the kind of stuff that comes up. And so that can sometimes be a really good opening of like, oh, well, you know, have you ever thought about like how, you know, the way you grew up is affecting how you parent? Like, do you have a hard time with that? I mean, I talk about all the time how like, oh my gosh, how easy it would be to hit my kids. Like that is would be such my default, right? Like I say all the time, like, because a lot of my mom friends, and I do think I'm a really good mom. Like I think I'm a really good mom. But like a lot of my mom friends think I'm a really good mom, right? And they're like, oh, you're such a good mom. Like I wish you could be so calm. I'm like, if you could see in my brain, like I mean, it is like constant. It takes 100% of my effort to be the mom I am, right? If I didn't think about it and if I just went on like what I know, I would be a terrible mother, right? Like I would not be a good mom. I would yell all the time. I would absolutely hit my kids. I would, you know, like, because they're so frustrating sometimes. I have so my job, I have a lactation lounge is my drop-in group. So I do it on Thursdays. I do 2 a day. I have 2 different locations on Thursdays, and it's a total drop-in group. So I have an open time, and moms from my community, because I just serve families, and this is not something I do just for Native families. So I'm really set on serving families in South Seattle, which is a neighborhood that I live in, and that's traditionally a neighborhood that is very underserved. We have much higher infant mortality rates in our zip code versus our neighboring zip code, right? Just a block away kind of thing. So yeah, I do a drop-in group, and it's a 2.5 hour time period. I have my scale, and families can come when they want to. They can stay for as long as they want to. I've been doing it for several years now, so now it's typically something that people come at the beginning and they stay for the whole thing. And we really build community, that kind of stuff there. I handle any breastfeeding problems we have, but then a lot of times they're just coming for emotional support, right, and connection and community. And that's been really fun. And so sometimes we don't even talk about breastfeeding. You know, I spent one day telling like a couple of new moms how amazing it is to go to Taco Time, which is one of our like local fast food restaurants. It's like the best fast food in Washington. And, you know, I'm like, oh, the best thing is when your baby's sleeping is you need to go to Taco Time and you need to get this and get the crustas and get the soda with the really good yummy ice pellet ice, and then drive to the lake and just sit at the lake and eat your lunch while your baby sleeps in the car. You know, like this kind of stuff. And like the moms are like, what? Yeah, like, and everyone else is like, yeah, it's the best thing ever. Go and do that. You know, I mean, we can just like talk about anything. It does not have to be breastfeeding, even though there's usually always someone that's ready to quit. You know, I tend to have like 3 groups of moms. There's like someone that's going to quit that day if they don't get help. There's a couple folks with like just regular old breastfeeding problems, right? It's not too hard, but it's not easy either. They're just really getting in the groove. And then I have my veterans, right? The ones that have been there, done that. And I do a lot of facilitating of the veterans of leading the group, right? Because for a lot of them, like I've worked with them for years and worked in the community for years, and I know multiple babies, you know, some of them are on their 2nd, 3rd babies. And so if a new mom comes and says like, oh my gosh, it really hurts, and I look at her nipple and I'm like, ooh, yeah, that's not good. You know, and I'll say like, oh, hey, you know, like, Emily, like, you know, remember with Joshua, like you went through that, like, what are the things that worked for you, right? Even though I was Joshua's LC and I'm the one who told her, told her what to do, and we fixed the problem together. But like by putting that power in her place, right, and her being able to be the leader and help another mom, that helps facilitate that self-esteem too, right? And building that self-esteem and building leaders in the community and encouraging mothers to help mothers, right? Because that's the way, I mean, like my goal has always been to work myself out of jobs, right? Like as a social worker, as a lactation consultant, right? Like at the end, I should not have a job. And so for breastfeeding support, it's the same way, right? Like I hope that there's a day that nobody needs to come to me for breastfeeding support, right? And they can just knock on their neighbor's door, or they can just call their auntie and someone's gonna be able to help them with their problems. Yeah, so I will say like it definitely started out super small and it took a long time to build it up, right? So it was not super easy. As far as advertising goes, I did almost everything through Facebook, right? So like I set up a Facebook page that provides, on the Facebook page, it's private, and I have interns, right? So we'll do breastfeeding support online, because that's really how most people are getting breastfeeding support now, right? Is online. So we have to be able to provide that and change and evolve with how we're doing this. So I have like the group Facebook page, but then we also have parenting groups that have Facebook page. So like my neighborhood is Columbia City. We have Beacon Hill is another neighborhood right near us. And I'll go on those Facebook pages every Wednesday and I, remind everyone like tomorrow is group, right? Even though I've been doing this group for 5 years now or 4 years. Everyone knows what time it is, but there's always new parents and kind of new parents coming into the community. So I remind people all the time through Facebook. I also, I invite a lot of people to the group, right? So like I might see on my neighborhood page someone, like I just did this yesterday, right? There was a mom that was like asked a breastfeeding problem, and I sent her a private message and said, I'd really like it if you could come to drop-in group tomorrow. My interns are gonna be there. They'll be able to help you with this, that kind of stuff. And then she went, right? So if we like actually go and ask moms and invite moms. Also, when I first started, and I don't do this anymore, but I'm gonna start again I just started a second group and I have some funding for that group, is food is really important too, right? Like if we can get funding and provide food, like provide a lunch or something like that, that can help get people there too. But it definitely took time. I mean, I would say it easily took me a year before I had a consistent, every day I had someone come. For the first year I'd have days, where no one came, and that was fine. I was telling Jen yesterday about this. I was like, I just always had my lab. Well, I started the group in my home, too. And I think that was helpful, right? Like I was inviting people into my home. It wasn't this clinical thing. I'd set my scale up on my table and people would just come to my house. I had scheduled it. We have a farmer's market on Wednesdays at 3, and my group was on Wednesdays from 1 to 3, right? Because I knew everyone was going to go to the farmer's market. They can do their WIC checks there. They can do, like everything like that. So I scheduled it at a time that was easy for people to get to. And people liked coming to my house, right? But then the group kind of got big and we had to move to it. Now we're not at my house anymore. But lots of people still reminisce, like they'd be like, we wish we were at your house, But providing food can be really helpful too, or at least snacks. When I first started, I baked like home baked things every week. So it was like, I'll bake bread or cookies or have something. And then I always had other work to do. If no one came, I had my computer. It wasn't a waste of time for me. Or I'd like watch a show on Netflix on my phone. I'd do something so that I didn't feel like if no one came that it was a total waste for me. Like, okay, at least I got a couple emails out, or I watched a couple episodes of Orange is the New Black, or I did, like whatever. So yeah, but yeah. It's hard and it's frustrating, and I definitely get it, but and eventually word of mouth helps. I'd say almost everyone. I do like almost no self-promotion as a lactation consultant, anything. It's just word of mouth eventually, but it took years, years to get there. I do it on my own. It's free. So I was telling these guys yesterday that for me, I tithe 20% of all of my work, right? So 20% of everything I do is for free and a community service, and Thursdays are my community service. So I do my drop-in groups for my community, for the moms and babies in my community at no cost to them. And it's completely volunteer, like my volunteer time. And so the costs also, like most groups that I find in like tribal communities are free if they're starting them up. I don't care, like really, I like whatever, send me to jail, like I'm cool. Same thing, like I do a milk drive every year for a baby in our community where I collect milk. So the first one was 2 years ago when a mom in our community passed away in childbirth, and so I held a milk drive in my community. It was for just like the moms in my drop-in groups, moms that I had helped throughout the years, and in 3 days we collected 6 months worth of breast milk, right? People just brought it to my house and I put it in my deep freezer, and then I delivered it to the dad. Did the same thing for another mom in the community that adopted a baby, and she had previously breastfed her son and wanted to provide breast milk. And other lactation consultants in the community freaked out about it, right? Like they were so concerned about liability. They were so concerned about what I was doing. But I was just like, this is life and death though. Right? It's life and death. I ain't got time to think about that. And so it's, it is challenging, but with drop-in groups, I will say, like, in general, I don't think liability is an issue. Like for the other lactation consultants in Seattle that I know, because there's a drop-in group every day of the week. Monday through Friday in Seattle somewhere. The other lactation, they usually do like $10, but they are not clients, right? We're not having people sign letters of consent. We're not having people sign disclosures. We're not having people do that at drop-in groups the way we would do it if we went into someone's home and did a home visit with them, right? So none of the LCs are doing that in their drop-in groups. In general, drop-in groups are going to be a place where you get advice, right, or information. A lot of times, I do mine a little differently. I do full exams, oral exams. If I think a baby has a tongue tie, if I see a mom that has horribly damaged nipples or something like that, I'm going to treat her, right? I can't let her leave without treating her. As an LC and as a social worker, right? Like that's my duty to do that. But yeah, as far as I know, like the liability piece, I have not heard that come up, or other people be concerned about it. I think you could do a sign-in sheet, you know, with a little blurb at the top, especially if you're part of a organization or a government like a public health department or a tribe, and if that is something they're concerned about, I think having a sign-in sheet with a little paragraph at the top that they may or may not read, right? That's not up to you though, to make people read things, that says like, you know, any of the information you receive today is your choice, you know, like blah, blah, blah. Like we can figure out that wording and then they sign in and agree to that. And I think that would release someone from liability. But yeah, I mean, my concern would be more the opposite of like, if we have someone come to our group and we don't treat them, right? We don't, then what's the liability, right? Like for me, like I've had babies that show up at my drop-in group that I'm scared for their lives, right? Like I've had a baby come to a drop-in group that is like the color of a manila envelope. They are so jaundiced, right? Or I weigh a baby and they are so low in their birth weight. Like I have to treat that baby, right? I have to figure out something. I can't say like, I'm not your LC, like that's not traditionally how we parented. We were never bosses of our children, okay? Our children were always on loan to us, right? And it was our job to grow them into strong, healthy adults to go and live their own lives. We also see a negative impact upon our self-esteem as Native parents and as Native people, right? So, you know, when you think about like self-esteem is something that I think is really important to talk about, especially in context of breastfeeding. It takes an immense amount of self-esteem to believe that you can breastfeed your baby, right? To know that your body and trust your body to make the most perfect, amazing food for your baby and grow just your baby on their own, right? Like that takes a huge amount of self-esteem. We have to feel really good about ourselves, right? And in general, in our society, for especially Native women, right, and Native parents, like we're often taught we make better mascots than mothers, right? That's the messages that we're getting, okay? And so when it comes to like feeling good, feeling confident, knowing these things, sometimes we have to fake it till we make it, right? We might be scared to death to put our baby to our breast and trust that that's going to happen. But then as we see it happen, right, every day, we see our baby grow, we see our baby get full, we see our baby get those nice chubby brown legs, you know, all of that. Then we build that confidence in our own bodies and our own selves, right? And then we're more confident in life outside of mothering too, right? And are stronger individuals. And then, of course, we see an increase in domestic violence and child abuse, which was previously foreign to Native cultures, which we talked about. So we have this traditional meaning of Native parenting. So traditionally, we saw parenting as taking care of the nation, right? Taking care of our citizens. This is, you know, kind of more common terms that we hear now, or is it takes a village to, you know, like raise our children. Children are our future, right? We say a lot of these things, but they're often not followed through, right? Like we can say children are our future, yet we take away their health care, we take away their access to food, we take away their access to clean water, and we do all these things that, you know, really show children that they're not our future, and we don't actually really care what happens to them, you know, as a society. But traditionally we did, right? Children were everything. They were our future citizens. Without these kids, that, you know, we had nothing. Parenting was considered a sacred responsibility, right? We definitely didn't own our children, right? They weren't ours to do what we wanted with. We were gifted them to take care of them, right? And eventually raise them to be adults that can go and live on their own and do their own thing and be on their own path. Children were placed at the center of the nation, right? With this, I kind of picture, like, I don't know if you all know emperor penguins, right? Or have seen the March of the Penguins, but, you know, some of the things that the emperor penguins do is when it's really, really, really cold, because it's always really cold, where they live. But when it's really, really, really cold, you know, they have like their eggs on their feet, because if the eggs even touch the ground, they're dead. So, you know, like the males and the females both take care of their eggs, and they put them on their feet. And as babies, they do the same thing. They sit on the feet of their parents as they grow and are huddled in. And the weakest and the youngest and the coldest of the penguins are at the center of the circle. And then the strong, you know, as you go out, right, and we're talking thousands of penguins, the strongest of the penguins are on the outside, right, protecting them from the cold, right, protecting them from the harsh environment, keeping them warm, right? And then as those ones get really, really cold and the elements are really hurting them, and these guys are nice and warm in the center, they rotate, right? And they move everything. So I really see like children were always at the center of our communities, always being taken care of by the stronger people and more capable people. Children were also seen as a reason to rebuild our nation, right? And I often say, because I've worked in lots of communities, and typically I get these questions from, or hear this from, non-native providers or nurses or, you know, folks, but they get really frustrated with how many babies we all have, right? It's like, why do you keep having so many babies? Like, I can't believe that, you know, she has 5 kids, she has 6 kids, right? That's why, right? Because millions of us were killed, right? And we need to rebuild this nation, okay? We need to rebuild this nation. We need to have lots of babies. Excellent, look at that, yeah. But, you know, like, it's so important, right? It is important. And, you know, although we may have people that are having lots of babies that aren't able to take care of them, right? Which is absolutely a challenge, and we have to work with those families. But, you know, they're not being irresponsible. They're not being hateful, right? They're not wanting to like have babies to ruin their lives, right? They're having babies to rebuild their nation, right? For another chance, right? Another chance to mother and be good moms and do something right. And then something might get in the way, right? And we're back to square one. But you know, like it's not a malice. It's not a decision that's made, you know, sometimes it's not even a decision that's ever made, but you know, that need to rebuild a nation is so important. And then also recognizing that children really do have wisdom, right? They're so smart. They have so much to offer us. I love listening to kids talk, right? They know so much about the world. And it's just, you know, it's just really, really important to recognize the wisdom that they have and what we can learn from them as adults. So I'm going to go into the 7th generation principle here. So as I said, you know, like in my tribe and in many other communities around the world, we have this concept of, you know, what we do affects the 7 generations that come after us. And we've talked a lot about that. You know, as you know, I was the first in several generations to breastfeed, right? The first in 5 generations to breastfeed. And for me, you know, that choice, I was the first grandchild in my family to have a baby. And I am not a modest breastfeeder at all. I will breastfeed anytime, anywhere. I don't care. Like, I've never covered. I've never done anything like that. I'm just going to breastfeed my baby when they're hungry. And I did this at family events, you know, and this is a role that I'm pretty comfortable in being. I am absolutely the black sheep of my family. You know, that's cool. Like, I'm good being that for in my family. There are absolutely people and women especially that are not comfortable with that, right? So for me, being the first one to breastfeed and being so open about breastfeeding and maybe getting little side comments or looks or that kind of stuff didn't bother me, right? If anything, that makes me more angry, and I'm like, you know, like, I'm just gonna breastfeed louder, you know, or something like that. So, you know, those things, but like that was who I was, right? So I just made it very normal and normalized breastfeeding. And since then, we've had about 9 babies born in our family since my first was born 8 years ago, and every single one has been breastfed. right? Every single one has been breastfed. All of them are breastfed for a pretty long time too, right? All of them are weaning on their own when they're ready. Because it just took one person, right? Like one person in a family, okay? And if we think about like that affecting multiple generations, right? Because I know it can be really frustrating sometimes, like when we just have like, we spend so much time working and encouraging moms to breastfeed and doing our thing, and we just we just got one person this month to breastfeed, right? Just one person did it, or she just did it for, 3 weeks or something like that. But like that makes a difference, right? That one person is going to make a difference for her family and all the babies born in her family, and then all those babies that are born, and then all those babies that are born, right? Like it can have a lifelong impact for generations. And for us, it was like, oh, I wish I could have helped more, right? I wish more women were breastfeeding. One's pretty good, right? When we think about the long game. That was one thing I learned in social work school, right? We have to be absolutely okay never, ever, ever seeing good outcomes and recognize that those will happen, right? They might be after our lifetime, but what we do is going to impact them. So yeah, breastfed for a super long time, and have really reclaimed that practice for my family, right? And I have no doubt that all babies, I do threaten, I may have threatened them that if they didn't breastfeed their babies, I would do it for them. So, I absolutely have said it, but I'm like, I have no doubt that these, all the babies I come in contact with in my family, they're gonna breastfeed their babies because they know I'll just do it for them, if they don't. So our choices absolutely affect the generations that come after us, right? The next 7 generations that come after us. And again, if we think about time as cyclical and not linear, what we do does affect the generations that came before us, right? And that was illustrated, I believe, with the vision I had when I first breastfed my baby and I saw my ancestors, right? I saw them looking at me and I saw them happy, right? I saw them happy that I was breastfeeding my baby, that I was parenting my baby, right? And it made it worth it for them and was healing for them. I believe breastfeeding is an act of control over our health, right? This is that physical part of it, right? We know that breastfeeding is important for diabetes, for heart disease, for SIDS, for ear infections and respiratory infections and other illnesses that we might come into contact with, right? Breastfeeding is so important for that. It really is saying to ourselves and our community that we want the best thing, right? We want the best thing. It just occurred to me, I want to read something. Hold on. All right. I'm going to pull it up on my phone. So my friend Kimberly, her name's Kimberly Seals Allers, and she's an African-American breastfeeding advocate. She's amazing, does awesome work. She's one of the founders of Black Breastfeeding Week. She just wrote a book called The Big Letdown. It's very, very, very good, looking at how breastfeeding is undermined by so many different things. Here we go. She wrote an article a couple years ago, probably about 3 years ago or 4 years ago now. So like I said, she's one of the founders of Black Breastfeeding Week. And the second Black Breastfeeding Week was happening during the same time of right after Michael Brown was shot in Ferguson in Missouri, right? And there was, lots of stuff happening around that. And now we've had this, ongoing conversation in our country around, the police and especially the relationship with the Black community. And some things I talked about yesterday was that, a lot of times in the Native community, we are statistically insignificant, right? Or we are other, or we are, we're not included in some of this stuff. especially when it comes to breastfeeding and parenting. I mean, like, there's nothing, like almost nothing honest out there. And so a lot of times what I find myself needing to do is I'll be looking at stuff that's happening in the Black community or the, you know, Hispanic community or the Asian community, you know, things that research that might come out, and I can look at that and see like, yeah, that applies, right? Like that applies to our native communities. So she had written this article for the Huffington Post called What Ferguson Has to Do with Black Breastfeeding Week. Right? What Ferguson has to do with Black Breastfeeding Week. And I read it and I will literally, I mean, I was like, had a come to Jesus moment. I was like, this is everything. I mean, the way she writes is just incredible. But I've saved a couple paragraphs that I really love from that. And I'm just going to read that too, because I think it really illustrates this taking control of our health. So she says, while breastfeeding is a critical health imperative in our community as we battle unconscionably high infant mortality rates and poor infant and child health statistics, it is also a gesture of empowerment and self-determination. Black Breastfeeding Week is a declaration that we as Black mothers will not settle for a manufactured artificial food substance that is aggressively peddled, particularly in our low-income communities via government programs. We will not give in to being sold on the message that we can settle for good enough. We will not quickly give in to the corporate influences and profit-making interests that want us to feed our babies synthetic food from birth and then flood our communities with poor food options, liquor stores, and cigarette advertising. We are eyes wide open to the system that from day one of life wants to give our babies less than, give our schools less than, give our communities less than, then treat our young men as less than. Breastfeeding is our symbol to the world that I will make the best effort to commit to giving my baby the best first food possible, despite my circumstances. It is our statement that our babies matter, their health matters, my health matters, our lives matter, even if they don't to you, they matter to me and mine. Breastfeeding is the beginning of changing our narrative, the narrative that says we don't care about our children, so therefore you don't have to care about our children. It is our living, breathing, lactating, sucking, and nurturing rallying sign against the norm, a personal protest sign, fist up, breast out. It is about our power to change the health course and parenting course for our children by starting with a powerful but not easy commitment, because let's face it, our people have never shied away from hard. Isn't that good?